to the All Real Show. This is where we discuss issues pertaining to the socioeconomic system and how they relate to everything. Why and how are the fundamental questions. Answer them enough, you get to the truth. I'm your host, Alex, and my guest today has traveled the world extensively. She's done it by desire, determination, courage, and a minimalist lifestyle. She understands that we're all one and the entire earth is our home. That understanding and realization that most of the world's problems stem from the same cause led her to work with the Venus Project as a point of contact for several years. While still volunteering at TVP, she learned about the Tron Project and began working with them and continues to this day. She writes for her personal blog and is in the process of writing a book that will detail her journey and adventures around the world, as well as insights to her lifestyle and perspective of the world. It will include many travel stories, as well as her struggles with money, visas, laws, society, and more. Please welcome Sasha to the show.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Sasha, thank you for being here with me. I don't recall how I actually ran across your blog, but it's very interesting, and I was intrigued almost right away.
Thanks.
With what you've done and how you've done it. And, you know, anything is possible. I mean, we know that if you're determined enough. But why don't you tell us a little bit about that, about kind of how you got started with traveling around the world?
Okay, so how I got started, let's see. I mean, I guess I kind of started traveling when I was still in high school. I went to high school in New Jersey, just outside of New York City. And I really enjoyed snowboarding, so I kind of took like small trips to go up the coast to snowboard in Vermont and up to Canada and different places like that. And I would just sleep in my car because I didn't have much money. I just did it because I wanted to snowboard. And then once I finished high school, then the only thing I really wanted to do was snowboard. So I got into my Honda Civic and I drove across the US by myself and got to Whistler, Canada, and basically just stayed there I stayed there for the summer because that was the only place I knew where I could snowboard in like July. Then I drove back across Canada where I was supposed to, then I was supposed to go to New York City, go to university there. Then I went there for like a week or 2 weeks and, you know, I looked around, I was like on Wall Street and I was just watching all these zombies like walk around, like running around, you know, just involved in making money and nothing else. And I was like, I don't want to be like one of these people, you know. I want to go back to the mountains. I want to go to Canada. I want to do what I'm passionate about. So I drove back again for the third time, and just came back to Canada. And there I met lots of people that also traveled around the world and were from all kinds of different countries. So that kind of gave me, my first introduction, you know, when I was 18, that, you know, traveling can be cheap. You know, if you don't need hotel rooms and expensive restaurants or expensive things, and it's totally doable. So yeah, and then after Canada, I just kind of took off and went elsewhere in the States, Mexico, Australia, and further.
Right. So you got to, I know because again, I read your blog that, you traveled some when you were younger with your father and your brother, I believe, and you saw some of the contrast there of, you know, poor people everywhere and stuff. So
yeah, but
I was just going to say, you obviously you noticed it early, you were exposed to it early, but then seeing the Wall Street area and having just had a taste of the freedom of traveling, I'm sure that was a big contrast for you, right?
Yeah. So there's different kinds of like contrasts, I guess, that I noticed throughout my life. Like you said, even when I was a kid, my father took us to places like Tunisia, for example, you know, where you see little kids begging on the street for money or for food, and, you know, just a horrible contrast between extremely poor people and rich people. And of course, you see that in New York City and Moscow as well. I was born in Moscow, so I'm originally from Russia. My father still lives there. So, of course, in those big cities as well, you see homeless people outside. And, even as a kid, I was wondering, like, why are there people sleeping on the streets? Does it have to be like this? And I found it kind of disturbing that everybody just seems to accept this. Like, you just accept that these people just live on the streets, and they're begging for money or for food. And I don't know, to me, it was just this kind of, disgusting feeling. And then once I got a bit older, again, I saw this different contrast, right, between the people on Wall Street, running around like zombies, just with their only, ambition was to make money, and they didn't seem to enjoy their lives at all, versus the poor snowboard and ski bums, in Canada that I met, who were enjoying and loving their lives and didn't have a penny, just like me. So, I went through some realizations that, maybe the world doesn't have to be like people tell you it should be,
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
and also growing up in two different countries. So basically I grew up in Russia and US because most of my family still stayed in Russia while my mother, brother, and I immigrated to the US when I was young. I also saw a lot of contrast in that, in people's understanding of what was good and bad, or what was right and wrong, what a woman was supposed to do, what a man was supposed to do. A lot of it is very different in those two countries. So I also learned at an early age that there is no right and wrong. It's just perception. There is no good and bad. It just depends on, your background. And a lot of things are not as clear as people might want you to believe,
100%, Sasha. I totally agree. You're exactly right. Yeah, everything is perception. And, again, like you said, going to the different countries, I'm sure you saw that, like you said, that how people, the majority of people kind of believe things as though, like you said, this is how life is. This is what's right. This is what's wrong. But then when you go to another country, you see they think differently, but they both believe in it, right?
Yeah. Most people around the world, kind of everywhere in the world, seem to believe that, this is how life is. You go to school, then after school you go to university, then you get a job, and you get married and you have kids. And most people all around the world believe in this and don't seem to question it. Although in some places they do question a bit more than other places.
Right.
But yeah, with a number of things, of course, there are different perceptions of all kinds of subjects. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Of course, that's something I really want to talk about is your experiences with your traveling. So that's something that seems to be a general consensus, is the typical timeline that a life is supposed to take, right? Birth, school, work, death. With marriage thrown in and... Yeah.
And that was the interesting thing because, from a young age, my family was also telling me that, that I should go to university. And I kind of wanted to rebel. And, once I saw these people on Wall Street, I was like, why should I go to university? Why should I make money? Why should I be a slave? I see my mother, she works for IBM and she gets abused by them. They give her the amount of work that 2 or 3 people should do. But because she does it, she, keeps her job and she's, she thinks that's the most important thing in life is to have, well, maybe not the most important thing in life, but she thinks it's very important, to have a career and all this. And to me, I was like, well, why? Why is it so important? If all I really want to do is have fun and be happy, then why do I need a career for that? Why do I need a lot of money? I don't need a lot of money to, back then I was, the only thing I really wanted was to be in the mountains, and I didn't need a lot of money to be in the mountains, So.
Where were you born at in Russia? What area?
In Moscow.
Oh, in Moscow. Okay, so you were born in a big city.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when you came to the U.S., you went to the West Coast, wasn't it?
No, I lived on the East Coast, so in Jersey,
okay.
On the outskirts of New York City.
Okay.
Like a 20-minute drive from New York.
Yeah, very cool. I'm going to go ahead and tell everybody to give people an idea. I'm sure they don't realize the extensiveness of your travels, which I've compiled the synopsis here. I got it from your blog, but so I'll make this very quick and give everybody a better idea here of what we're talking about, that she didn't just travel to one or two places. So starting in 2007, as you put it, and I agree, you were freed from slavery, meaning you finished high school. You drove across North America 3 times, lived in Canada. In 2008, you lived in Canada and California, drove up and down west coast of the U.S., backpacked in Mexico, lived in Utah. In 2009, traveled through western U.S. to Vancouver, backpacked in New South Wales and Queensland, Australia, lived in New York City. In 2010, traveled to Russia, the Netherlands, and France, lived in Switzerland, backpacked Italy and Turkey, lived in Sydney, Australia. In 2011, you traveled to New York, Lisbon, Spain, and Moscow, traveled through the middle of Australia, backpacked from Bali to eastern Indonesia, snowboarded and sailed in New Zealand. In 2012, you lived in New Mexico, hitchhiked to Cali, visited Baja, Mexico, snowboarded and hitchhiked around New Zealand, lived in Sydney, backpacked Thailand and Cambodia. In 2013, you visited Moscow and Lithuania, snowboarded Bulgaria, stopped in Turkey, surfed in Morocco, lived in Sydney, traveled through outback Australia. In 2014, you lived in the south coast of Australia in Lake Tahoe, California, sailed from St. Martin to Aruba, visited Russia, learned to dive on Gili Trawangan, Indonesia, and visited Malaysia. In 2015, you lived on the south coast of Australia, backpacked through Sri Lanka, lived on Hawaii, traveled to Moscow, Minsk, Poland, Budapest, and Slovenia. You lived in Austria. I mean, it's amazing. In 2016, you lived in the Australian Alps. You hitchhiked to Slovenia and Czech Republic. You visited Ukraine and Moscow, lived in a surf camp in Nicaragua, and lived on Hawaii. In 2017, we're getting there, people, traveled through the east coast of the U.S., took the Trans-Siberian Railway across Russia, lived in Irkutsk, Russia, in 2018.
Irkutsk.
So how do you say that?
Irkutsk.
Irkutsk. Yeah, Russia's Russia's tricky. You have to be really good with your vocals with Russian. In 2018, you lived in Siberia, took the railway across Russia twice, hitchhiked through Mongolia. In 2019, you lived in a small village by Lake Baikal, Russia, took the railway back to Moscow, hitchhiked from Moscow to Spain, visited the UK and Turkey. And now, in 2020, you were in Romania, but as of now, you're in Madrid, Spain, right? For now.
Yeah, well, I'm not in Madrid, actually. I'm in a small town called Les Tartit, north of Barcelona. But yeah, it took me a while to make that timeline, actually, because I forgot, where I had been throughout all these years.
Right.
So when I first made the website, I got confused. I made some mistakes at first, and I had to fix it. But yeah, basically, I mean, I've just been going one way. I haven't been living in one particular place and then, taking trips here or taking trips somewhere else. I've just been always only buying one-way tickets, basically. And just, I don't know, just going where I want to go.
Exactly. Yeah, you've never had an established permanent residence where, like most people, right? You live in one place or one area, one house, and then you travel, you vacation somewhere and then come back. And yeah, you just go wherever from place to place.
Yeah, I hate vacations. I wouldn't go on vacation if somebody paid me.
Well, your life since 18 has been a vacation to most people.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is beautiful. I mean, that's amazing. And the fact that you've, if you were a multimillionaire traveling on business, this wouldn't be as, if people would say, okay, yeah, golf clap, good for you, right? But the fact that you did it the way that you've done it, a total minimalist lifestyle, it's pretty amazing, really.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, so I started my website because I just wanted to explain to people how it's possible to travel the way that I travel, which is, I mean, usually I would spend like somewhere between $300 and $500 a month, you know, which is, you know, maybe 6,000 US dollars a year. You know, it's not that much.
Right.
So the thing, I don't know, maybe the biggest difference in this and how most people live isn't even the traveling part, but the fact that I've never had a job either, like a real job. You know, the longest job I've ever had was for like 7 months, you know, but I will just work for a short amount of time, make money as fast as possible. So the best way to do that is through like US hospitality jobs, like bartending. You can make a lot of money through tips. Save that money and then quit and live as cheaply as possible. And you can do that basically all over the world. Because I mean, I've lived in some of the most expensive countries. I've lived in some very cheap countries, and it's not impossible to go there with just a little bit of savings. Right.
And like you said, I know your blog details a lot of this. It's very interesting. You know, for anybody, if you are a traveler, it's you know, a lot of recognition and maybe some extra insight. If you're curious about it, it's a lot of you know, good knowledgeable stuff to take from it and learn from it. And if you're just curious, it's very interesting to read a lot of this and how you've done it. I was wondering also, because, you know, I used to travel a little bit, you know, kind of regionally here in the U.S. I'm in Virginia, and one of the ways that I did it was with truckers, and just a little thing here that when I first started, this was when I was much younger, but I started asking them. I would go to truck stops. It was basically where I would start at, and then I would travel to the next one, you know, and then find a different way to go there. But I started asking the truckers, hey, you headed this way, the way that I wanted to go, you know, east, for example. And they would say, oh, no, I'm going west, right? And then I'd see the guy leave, and he'd go eastbound. I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Right? So my question is, because I know from doing stuff like that, I kind of learned after doing it, okay, the trick here is not to say give them, and you can do this simple psychology with people also, but is to not say give them a, you know, a destination. Just say, hey, which way are you headed?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you always ask which way you're heading. Yeah, and then they'll tell you, and then you can ask them.
Right.
One problem, actually, I was doing a similar thing when I hitchhiked across Europe last year, and I got dropped off in some gas stations, especially in Germany, and I would just ask truckers or whoever else, and I came up to some of these truckers, and I think they thought I was a prostitute. So
probably at first.
I was a little bit, because I was by myself.
Right.
And well, at least because at one point I got tired of holding, because I had a big backpack on with all of my stuff basically. So I once left my backpack at wherever I left it at like the petrol station, and went around without my backpack asking truckers for a lift. They thought I was a prostitute. And then some undercover cops came up to me, I think it was in Switzerland, and they they showed me their badge and stuff, and they're like, what are you doing here? I'm like, I'm just hitchhiking. And they're like, they didn't believe me at first until I showed them my backpack, and then they're like, okay. I'm like, oh. And then I stopped asking truck drivers because,
Yeah, I could see that assumption being made a time or two in your travels. So how were and you've hitchhiked through a lot of different countries and areas. What, I don't know, it's just the whole thing is very interesting to me. What were people like in general? I mean, most.
Well, when you hitchhike, you kind of filter out a lot of people.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You can kind of say that hitchhiking is like a filter, because usually really nice people pick you up because they're helping you out for free. So most people everywhere that I've hitchhiked were quite nice. Yeah, I mean, but of course that's in general. Like if someone's just helping you out, they're really nice. I mean, in Mongolia they were particularly extremely hospitable. I went there with a friend and hitchhiked like all over Mongolia for a month, and People were so nice. They brought us to their yurts. They like gave us tea, and they had this disgusting like salty milk tea.
That sounds
it's like
disgusting.
just imagine like yeah, it's disgusting. Just like it's mostly like fresh hot oily milk. Sometimes they put like butter in it and they put salt, and it tastes like absolute crap, but it was a nice, it was very nice of them, of course, that they're picking us up in the cold. It was in November when I was in Mongolia. So they'll pick us up and not only give us a lift, but also, invite us to their homes to stop. We're invited to some people's homes to sleep there for the night because they were worried about us.
Wow.
There was one guy who picked us up hitchhiking, and then he didn't speak a word of English or Russian. We couldn't communicate with him really, except for, some gestures. And he brought us to his village. He brought us to like his friend's yurt. Then he brought us to his like family's home. Then he brought us to his family's yurt. He gave us lunch, and he was just a really, really nice, friendly guy. And he hasn't seen many tourists. So he was just kind of curious and wanting to show off his home, I guess. Like he showed us his horse. He gave us a ride like up this beautiful mountain. I think it was like this supposed to be this sacred area, with a beautiful overlook. And like you can just imagine like these plains of Mongolia, and some small mountains here and there. And his mom offered us to sleep in her yurt. So we slept there, and she gave us dinner and stuff and breakfast. They fed us all the time. And they didn't want anything, they were just really nice. They were friendly people. The next day they just brought us back to the road and, said good luck. They didn't really understand what we were doing, because they didn't really understand hitchhiking. They thought that we were walking to Ulaanbaatar, which is 1,000 kilometers away. Wow. But people were extremely nice.
What is a yurt? I heard you mention that a couple times.
Yeah, so that's kind of like a teepee, but Mongolian. Okay. So it's people still live in yurts, basically. It's a home, but it's kind of,
primitive.
I don't want to say a tent, but almost like a tent, but made better and a bit bigger, and has a stove in it. Yeah, so the traditional kind of teepee of Mongolia.
Yeah. What was the kind of primary food and stuff they would eat?
They just ate sheep. So they only ate basically just two things, which was sheep meat and something made from flour, so either noodles or a tortilla kind of thing made from dough. And basically they would have the same from what I could tell, and I was there for a month with all kinds of different Mongolian people. They basically chopped up meat in different ways and chopped up these noodles in different ways, and sometimes they had the meat and noodles in a soup. Sometimes it was fried. Sometimes it was looking a little bit different, but basically it was the same thing all the time, just sheep and dough. So if you're a vegetarian, it's very difficult to find something to eat in Mongolia.
Yeah, I bet.
It will be almost, you will eat, I'm not sure what, just bread.
Yeah, they processed everything there, right? Made the noodles and everything right there.
Yeah, well, when we were in the country, of course, in the main city, Ulaanbaatar, you can get all kinds of different food and, have proper supermarkets and stuff. But when we were out in the countryside, especially these kind of people that lived, they're essentially nomads, and they lived in yurts. So they just had, their own flock of sheep, and every once in a while they would kill a sheep and eat it. And they had this massive bags of flour, so they would use that to make the noodles and the dough. It was really tasty, but it was hard though to eat that much just meat and dough for a month. After that it was vegan,
Right. Are you vegetarian or vegan or anything?
No, I try not to eat too much meat and stuff like that, but I don't go crazy over food.
Right.
I don't think I'm going to save the world if I go vegan. I tried it one time and I realized that, it's kind of hypocritical of me if I don't cut out palm oil, for example. And then I tried to cut out palm oil and animal products. And then I was like, okay, when look at my phone. I mean, my phone is made by slaves too.
Right.
Look at like any clothes, like basically anything that is around me, something is made by slaves or somebody's fucked up by this. So at the end, I kind of just decided that I won't go too crazy over this, and I would just limit everything, minimize everything.
Yeah.
You know, because if you're a vegan but you eat stuff with palm oil, but you don't care about this enormous amount of rainforest that's being cut down for palm oil. And I mean, palm oil is in like everything, you know, it's in like freaking lipstick and shit like that. It's in like half of like all foods you can find in the supermarket. It's everywhere.
Yes, I've read about the palm oil exactly like you're talking. And well, I was asking, of course, curiosity, and that would be extremely difficult, I think, to, like, you know, you're saying, to travel and eat whatever you basically can eat and then be picky about it on top of that. I don't think it would work very well.
Yeah, it will be difficult, of course. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of vegans that travel to different places, you know, but in some places it would be very difficult, and I'm not sure how much it matters.
Yes.
For you as an individual.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, like if you're also taking into account other things like palm oil and like buying new clothes, you know, buying new gadgets that are also made by slaves, then
yeah, I know. I'm, you know, the same, coming from the same place, and you try to at the end. That's the conclusion I came to too. Also, I mean, you try to be very conscious and understanding and limit maybe what you do, and, you know, not do this, but in the end, everything is kind of tied back to something in some way that's negative because of the, you know, the way the world operates. That
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you would live off of, even if you lived off rice cakes, there's probably people being enslaved making the rice, you know?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And rice fields too, they produce a ton of methane, which is a greenhouse gas, you know? So you can go on forever and you'll drive yourself crazy with these things. And I think, so the best thing you can do is just kind of minimize, you know, have an understanding of what's going on in the world and minimize your impact if you can. You know, like, I'm not going to eat hamburgers every day. I barely ever eat beef. But if I travel to Mongolia and some local people offer me some meat from their own sheep, I don't feel guilty for eating it.
Yeah. Also, of course, your travels, firsthand knowledge and experience is priceless. I've said that. I say that all the time. I mean, there's no replication for it. You know, you can study something from the time you're born to the time you're 50 years old. And if you don't actually do it or experience it until you're 50, once you do, you will have a new appreciation, understanding, you know, outlook, perspective on that, you know. So experience definitely is the number one teacher. But I also know that you did study international and global studies at, well, you graduated from University of Sydney in Australia, but did you start that in New York, you said?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, my parents really pushed me to go to university, and they were like adamant about this. So I really struggled with this because, you know, I just wanted to get away from all of that bullshit. I didn't want to be a part of it. I didn't see any reason to, you know, join the system and to have some kind of career. I didn't see any reason to study some subject for what, you know, because most universities are just revolved around getting some kind of job.
Exactly.
You know, but my parents were they were really pushy with this. So I quit that university in New York when I was 18. I spent a year like traveling around Canada and the US. Then a year later, I went to University of Utah for 2 semesters. I couldn't handle that. I couldn't handle the Mormons.
Oh, wow.
I didn't like it at all. I quit, then traveled some more. Then I went to City College in New York for 1 semester. And I quit that because it was just a waste of time, complete waste of time. I mean, it was easier than high school. And then at the time I was going out with an Australian guy, and his mother somehow convinced me and like got me into this course at the University of Sydney in Australia. And that course was called International and Global Studies. Mm-hmm. And it was a really difficult course. Usually it's quite hard to get in there. But because I did quite well in these other colleges, because they were so easy, I managed to get in. Right. And so I went to Sydney University. You know, I did like maybe 1 or 2 semesters. Then I quit again because it was just depressing and overwhelming. Mm-hmm. Basically, that course was, you're learning about all kinds of international and global problems and how people are trying to fix those problems. And what I learned was that none of it is working. You know, we have these huge, huge issues, you know, climate change, sustainability, war, all kinds of problems. And you learn about how different institutions, the UN, for example, or all kinds of NGOs, all kinds of different institutions, how they approach these problems. And yeah, like what I got from that degree was that none of it is working. Yeah. So I quit, I traveled around some more. Then eventually I found out about the Venus Project. And then it took me a little while to kind of see that perhaps that could actually be a solution, you know? Mm-hmm. And after I kind of, you know, I watched a lot of Jacques Fresco's lectures and read his book, and then I was like, okay, it's worth a shot, you know, and maybe we should at least, you know, in the bigger picture, like if you look at this idea that he had, that would actually solve these problems that I was learning about in university, you know? If you think about it as a whole, it would solve climate change, you know? It could anyway. Right. Mm-hmm. Maybe not would, but could. And, or at least you can prioritize, you know, the environment as opposed to just, making profit. Right. And then I went back to university and I decided to finish that fucking degree. Yeah, and eventually I finished it. I don't remember what year, like 2014, maybe 12? I don't remember. Mm-hmm. Anyway. Yeah, probably 2014, 2015. But yeah, I mean, that degree was important in that I got an institutional perspective of how fucked up the world was. Mm-hmm. You know, so now I know, I was so confident that, okay, this isn't just like some hippie point of view that I picked up from traveling and meeting a bunch of hippies. No, this is mostly I believe in this because of this prestigious institution, you know? Right. And, you know, Australians regard Sydney University as their second to best university. You know? So, you know, to get this kind of perspective from that kind of institution, I think is important as well. And that basically made me even more confident that I shouldn't waste my time making some kind of career for money. Right. I'm not going to waste my time trying to join the UN or some other organization or some NGO. You know, I'm going to continue to travel around the world, and maybe I will volunteer for the Venus Project or something that I see that's actually a holistic and global solution, rather than these like ambulances, you know, like NGOs.
Yeah, I saw the ambulance reference that you guys made that Tio was talking about, and essentially patchwork, you know, to say we're going to help with this small thing. And when you understand, I mean, that everything obviously is related, you know, we feel separate from each other in different ways. And then you zoom out, you know, into space and you see the little pin dot we're on and you think about the universe as a whole and you're like, how in the fuck can we be separate? Right. I mean, so, but, you know, and then again, you zoom back in and you think about the issues and problems on Earth. We have this system, obviously, that, you know, says this is how it's done. This is how money works. Money controls everything. You know, you have to trade for everything in order to get anything. And that's it, period. Now, everything else is a byproduct of that. And so when you've seen it, I mean, as you just stated, and then from the institutional standpoint, is interesting to me also because they again, are dealing with the same tools, right? I mean, they're still dealing with the same thing. They're not looking outside of the box because the box is what created the problem in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't know if you watched like our last Trumpcast we had about climate change, and Theo was explaining, how they treat, how a doctor, he doesn't just, see that your entire body, but not the genitalia. He sees the entire body. If something's wrong with the genitalia or you need to go in there, then you do that. But in this case, it's like capitalism is the genitalia, and it's like you don't touch it.
Exactly.
And that's how these institutions treat these problems. It's like they don't analyze the system, they don't analyze capitalism, and that is what's causing these problems. I mean,
exactly.
Yeah,
I was just going to say that's really interesting to me in I don't know, almost a sad way, but when you see that from an understander's, standpoint, like us or people who really understand the whole big picture, when all these proposed solutions and all these different people that supposedly are, experts in their field or whatever, and they're saying things like, again, just off the top of my head here, for example, if you're talking about income inequality, and you have a politician or whoever saying, well, what we need to do is tax these billionaires a little bit more, and then we'll do this a little bit, and then we'll do this a little bit, and everything will be a little bit better, And then people, millions of people, not 10, millions of people are like, yeah, that's fucking great. But it's weird because you're like, no, actually, that's not great because absolutely nothing changes in the scheme of things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think the biggest example with that is with climate change, because it's like we see it changing in front of our very own eyes. Every year CO2 emissions are going up and up and up. It is getting warmer. Every decade is like, this last decade was the hottest decade ever recorded. Last January was the hottest January ever recorded, and they're making these like stupid agreements, like these pledges, where we pledge, to lower emissions. But in reality, nobody's actually lowering their emissions, not nearly, maybe very, very few countries, but globally, we're not making a difference,
Exactly.
So you should understand that these agreements aren't working, and you should try to figure out why. You should try to analyze why are humans behaving like this? What gives them incentive to pollute the environment? What gives them incentive to burn fossil fuels and emit greenhouse gases? And they don't do that. They just try to punish and just they have a very shallow outlook on problems.
Yeah, well, I say in the beginning of the show, and I actually have it in the description because that's how big and fundamental I think that it is why and how are the two fundamental questions that if you want to know the truth of anything, you ask one or the other or both. And you keep asking, and when you answer that one, then okay, well, why or how is that like that? That second thing like that. Of course, if you hit a point where you can't answer it, you're stuck. But if you answer those things enough, the whys and hows, you will get to the truth of something. And that's the point you guys were making in the Tromcast, and that you made just now, that exactly. And people in general, from institutional standpoints to groups, most groups, to most people as individuals, they look at kind of like we're saying of the problems that are going on, and okay, well, how can we solve these from within this confines of this system? It's you really have to step outside of that because, and like you said, climate change is a great example. That all these agreements, I don't know how many people actually think these are good. But the reality is they signed some shit, and okay, and then what? And then everybody just goes back to what they were doing, and
exactly. It continues to pollute, and you don't solve any problems.
Not at all. And you would know because on your blog, I know you've wrote a article recently, your last article about climate change. And for anyone who doesn't, for anybody who's interested at all about the climate that you live in and the environment that keeps us alive and what's going on, there's, I'm sure, a lot of articles out there, but I liked yours. It was very concise, to the point, and you include links or, references to the points that you make, and it was very informative.
Great.
Yeah, and I encourage people to check it out.
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, there's like a ton of material, you can find about climate change. But I wanted to include just a little bit of information for my book, because throughout I'm writing a book right now, and throughout the book, I'm talking about my adventures and my life story, but also, what I've learned throughout my life. And climate change was kind of one of the major topics that made me understand that this system is just not working, and it won't work. Like, we won't be able to solve such a big global problem like climate change if we're competing with each other to just make profits, So I just wanted to write like a little bit of basic information about climate change, and then explain why we're not able to solve such a problem within this system. But yeah, I kind of ended up spending like a few months just like researching about climate change and digging into, a lot of information. And then I kind of just summarized it a bit and made this blog. But yeah, because I thought it was important to also talk about the basics if I'm talking about, why we're not able to solve it, and, how it relates to this system.
Yeah. And I know it gets redundant. I mean, it even does to me, to constantly stress and that it is the system that we live by, when that causes all these things, but also why you will never fix these things. And they constantly will get worse because, the system dictates that. There's so many examples you can point to, but, as far as climate change, it's easy to say cut emissions. Well, first of all, you have militaries, doing constant so-called training exercise and, flying jets around and all these things that use massive amounts of fuel. I mean, and for what? You're doing it for nothing. So you have the stupidity of it in that sense, but then you also have where, because everything is restricted and controlled and owned, it's just a competition, right? It's the competitive nature of everything that creates all this. Yeah,
I mean, it's because people have an incentive, they have an incentive to burn fossil fuels. That's you have an incentive to sell lots of cars because you own, a car, whatever the fuck, automobiles, and you need to sell them, and that's how you make money. That's how you survive, and that goes for oil, that goes for everything, So,
it goes for everything, yeah.
So if the incentive is to make a profit by selling more and more stuff, and this stuff requires the burning of fossil fuels, then that's what's gonna happen, So you need to remove that incentive in order to solve such a problem. And unfortunately, these institutions, they don't see that, I guess. They don't look deep enough and question, why is this behavior happening?
Yeah, it's a catch-22 in a lot of ways, because it's almost like you're damned if you do or you don't, in a way. I mean, because the way I see it is, it's like that. I sincerely think most people don't step outside the box. Most people don't think that way, in general, or from a business standpoint or whatever. But, hypothetically, even if you do, then you're still damned because, like, we're saying, and I think more and more people are starting to understand and realize, you're still stuck. If I'm a CEO of a company, yes, you can do things to try to, minimize your footprint or be more efficient and resourceful and those types of things. But you have to make profit or you're going to go out of business, and then everybody that works for you is not going to have a job and those types of things. So your hands are still tied in a lot of ways,
Yeah, that's the complicated, of course, scenario that we're dealing with, because that's the case for everybody. So, even if like a CEO of a, oil fucking company is like, decides that they're doing a bad thing, I'm not sure if they will stop doing that, especially if they have children to feed and they need to make money to support them. But yeah, I mean, for me, yeah.
I was just going to say, it's not even, like because of the way things work, the bigger a company gets, the more hands are in the pockets. Mm-hmm. So, if you're talking about a ginormous thing like that, like oil or, even say the military or these types of things, not even the president or any CEO can say, hey, look, we're going to stop this shit, because you have major stockholders and investors who are going to say, fuck you, we want to keep making profit, so it's not even like you can just do that again, even if you wanted to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe the alternative, would be, to provide people with, you have to provide people with an alternative, and
that's true.
Basically, if you provide people with a free alternative, a trade-free alternative, as what we talk about at TROM, then possibly you could change people.
I wanted to kind of cover some of this other stuff first, mm-hmm. but definitely wanted to get into, and we'll do that now, your experience with the Venus Project and TROM. We've touched on some of the issues. I do it in the show a lot too. So if people listen, they're more and more aware of stuff that we're saying. And I think this is very important, what we're about to talk about now. I mean, honestly, very important, because to put it in a nutshell, one of the things that I understand very clearly is you have to be going in the right direction. If you're not, it's what I call misdirected energy. For example, you take almost any protest you see, right? Gay rights, taxes, raise taxes, this politician that's corrupt, yes, those are issues. Yes, you should speak out. Yes, you should all this stuff. But like we were just saying, if you really understand the big picture and understand, even hypothetically, if you correct this one seemingly little thing that everything else is going to continue and everything else is going to, get worse and those types of things. So if everybody was saying the same thing, understanding the real problem, that collective consciousness would start to change. People would start to understand. And I think because there's been a lack for so long of people to really have a solution, right? Essentially. And then the Venus Project comes along, or they, were there, but they really, I think, got their exposure with the Zeitgeist movement. Regardless, a lot of people have taken hold with that, and, just to clarify, their ideas are on point. Jacques was the man. He's, the main creator and inventor behind it. And it's vital what they're doing and what they're saying. But I know your history with them, and I'd like you to tell us your experience with the Venus Project.
Okay. So let's see. So like I said, I found out about the Venus Project, through a friend when I was traveling. And this is during a time when I was, I had this understanding that the whole system is fucked up already, So this friend of mine showed me, I think Paradise or Oblivion, that documentary. And, I first watched that documentary and I was like, oh, that's nice. I mean, I was like, okay, I completely agree with the first half, where, they talk about all the problems and how the problem is the whole system and all this stuff. And then the solution, I was like, yeah, that's nice, but, that will never happen. And then, my friend was kind of like, yeah, but come on, Sasha, like, if you don't think it will never, will never happen, then it's not going to happen. At least some people should at least take it into consideration, and I kind of took that and I was like, okay, well, let me just listen to this guy, Fresco, some more. And I was just kind of intrigued because, he's such a charismatic character and I just enjoyed listening to him. So I listened to him more and more. And, eventually I read his book. And then after I read the book, I was like, okay, maybe it can happen. Maybe it can't, but we need to at least try. We need to at least try to do something, And like I said, then I went back to university and whatever, I finished. I spent a couple of more years, just traveling around the world because people invited me to, to sail across the Caribbean and to dive in Indonesia and stuff. No. Yeah. So especially when it's basically free, it's
Right.
So I got distracted for a little while and it's sailing and snowboarding and surfing in different places. But I always, talk to people about the Venus Project. I kind of, after a little while of just traveling around the world and having fun, I just felt really guilty, that I'm not doing anything. And, I'm also traveling around the world and seeing a lot of really fucked up shit, as I go. There's lots of poverty all over the place, especially, places like Indonesia, Nicaragua, or Sri Lanka, where I've been. And it's just such an extreme difference between, poverty in third world countries and prosperity in rich countries. And, I have firsthand, seeing that firsthand kind of had a big impact on me. So eventually I was like, okay, fuck it. I don't know how to join the Venus Project. So I'll just go to one of these, research center tours to meet Jacques Fresco because he was still alive then. And he was 100 years old. And so I thought, okay, he's getting a bit old. So let me just meet him before it's too late. And I did that, I think in 2015 or 16, something like that, on my way to Nicaragua. I had a flight, I think, from New York to Florida to Nicaragua. I rented a car, slept in it, went to the Venus Project tour. And Jacques, unfortunately, was already he was so old, he was so small. And he was still kind of battling, he still had this little bit of a fire, he was saying the same stuff I had heard him say over and over again on YouTube and stuff, but, just to see him still going and still criticizing the system and still,
talking shit about humanity, as you say.
Yeah, it really inspired me, and, and I kind of got this feeling that okay, I need to do something, if not for anything else, then for this little old man, because I think he deserves at least some people, working towards this direction. Because in the end, I thought, okay, this, idea of a resource-based economy, I couldn't see anything else that could be a solution, to these problems.
Right.
And while I was at the Venus Project Center, I talked to Roxanne, and she told me that, I told her that I'm originally from Russia, and she told me that the Russian-speaking Venus Project team is actually the biggest team, the biggest TVP team in the world, that with the most supporters and the biggest volunteer group, but that they had some problems communicating with the English speakers. So, and she basically offered me to help be the link between the English speakers and the Russian speakers. And, once I heard that, I was like, oh yes, that's so exciting. I had no idea that the Russian speaking team was so big or anything. I didn't know anything about them because obviously I watched all the lectures in English, but so then basically they told me, Roxanne and Sasha, another guy, they told me that so before I join the team, I would have to basically go through an orientation process to become a point of contact. But to do that, there's a...
Tell us about, I know you're about to, but tell us about that, because that's interesting to me too.
Yeah, so basically, well, there was a waiting time for that, so I had to wait, I think 8 or 9 months before I joined, before I'd even started the orientation process. But basically what it was is, you get together with a few people that want to be point of contacts, and some of the TVPs, they call it TVP support, which used to be known as, TVP activism. They changed the name to support.
Right.
So basically you get together with an admin and some other people that want to be point of contacts, and you watch mostly Jacques lectures, but sometimes some other material, and basically you just discuss this.
Make sure you understand the concepts and ideas,
so they can kind of get an idea of, to see that you understand what the Venus Project is about, I mean,
right.
I didn't have anything against it. In my personal opinion, I feel okay, if you want to help a project, you shouldn't make it so difficult, to have somebody go through months and months of waiting, and then, these weekly seminars,
That's what was surprising to me, to read that.
Yeah. So, and you need to take quizzes and stuff, because it's in the end, what do they want? Because I did this whole point of contact orientation process, and then in the end, what happens is you just get thrown in a Skype group with all the other point of contacts, and you just share, maybe some people did some events, a screen showing in one place or in another place. And mostly you just discuss things, and you meet and you talk about some subjects like human behavior and whatever else. So
the point of contacts would share information. You guys would kind of have group discussions. And then other than that, what was your role as and I know you did some of the translating, you can get into that, but were you essentially, the idea is for just random people to contact you that had questions and then you explain it? Is that what it is?
No, I mean, my personal role was a little bit different. So usually a point of contact they would start a Facebook page in their country or whatever, and translate some material if they need to, or promote promote TVP material. And, maybe make some meetups or some screenings of, the Choice is Ours or something like that, or Jacques lectures or something like that. But my personal role was different, because I was to join, an already existing team, which was the Russian speaking team. So that team, they have more supporters than all of the English speaking, I mean, if you count by
right?
Who's supporting the, social media page, who's, signed into the social media page or YouTube channel or something like that. The Russian speakers are much, much more popular, let's say, than English speakers. So.
Do you have an idea why that might be?
Yes, I have, a lot of ideas, but it's very complicated. So, so let's see. So I'll just tell you the story. Maybe you can kind of understand a little bit about the idea.
Sure.
So like I said, I was meant to join that team and to fix communication problems. That's what they said, to help with the communication problems. So I initially thought that, okay, this means translating some messages and stuff, and it shouldn't be too, what can possibly happen? And little did I know, it was a lot more than communication problems. There were a lot of problems. So I got thrown basically into the Russian speaking TVP admin chat. So the main guys that created the Russian speaking group, and they explained to me a ton of problems. I felt like I was just thrown in this huge mess. And I wrote all of this down. My mission was to make things better between the Russian speaking team and Roxanne and the other English speaking teams. So what I wanted to do was clear up communication as much as possible and just, to settle things so things can be better for both teams so that they can communicate well together and we can grow something from this,
Right.
So, but it wasn't as easy as I thought because it was really, really difficult to communicate with the English-speaking teams, actually, to my surprise.
Now, why was that, though? Say why that was.
So, let's see. So, these Russian-speaking guys, they explained to me a lot of problems. I'll just give one example.
Yeah.
One example was that basically Roxanne asked all of the teams, all of the existing TVP teams, to change the name of their social media pages from the Venus Project to TVP Support. Now, the problem with that is that if you want people to find your group on social media, they won't know what TVP Support means. So, especially the Russian-speaking people, because in Russian, it's a different alphabet, first of all, and the name of the team is called Проект Venera. So, that's the Venus Project in Russian. If you change the name Проект Venera to TVP Support, no one is going to know what the fuck that is, because they have no idea what TVP Support means. Like, most Russian people don't speak English.
Right.
So, and then even worse, in Russia, because the Venus Project had gained a lot of popularity, there were also other groups, like random people, all sorts of crazy groups that are trying to like impersonate the Venus Project. So they will make a page on social media saying that they are the Venus Project. And they're not, they're a fake group. And what they will do is, for example, there was one group who was trying to build some kind of, village on the outskirts of Moscow. And they were getting donations from people. And they were getting, people to come from like even different countries to go and volunteer for them to build some kind of, like shacks and stuff. And so basically they were getting money from people under the name of the Venus Project.
Yeah, and they were scamming them.
Scamming, yeah, there were lots of scammers. Yeah, so imagine if the real team wasn't able to name their group the Venus Project in Russian, Проект Venera, and instead called themselves TVP Support, then nobody would know what the fuck TVP Support is, and they will just go to the scammers page and believe that that's the real Venus Project page because there is no other Venus Project page called the Venus Project.
Exactly, right.
So I actually flew to Florida to explain this to Roxanne in person in 2017, I think. And not only this, there was like a lot of other problems, ton of other problems with this lack of really poor communication, which I thought was pretty poor communication. But, once I explained something like this, I was hoping that we could find a solution. But for most of the problems, we didn't really find a solution because the people I was communicating with, I won't put any other names out there, but I was communicating with other admins of the Venus Project. And basically, it was like impossible to get anything through to them. So the Russian-speaking team was going to me with problems. I was translating these problems. And it seemed like these people don't really care. They just care about, okay, these are the rules. This is the rule that Roxanne made for whatever reason. And we have to go by these rules. Just like any normal people, in today's society. They're not questioning deeper of like, okay, well, this is a problem. Let's talk it over. Let's communicate properly. So I wasn't able to, and I tried for months. I spent months just doing nothing but talking between the teams, between the Russian-speaking team and the English speakers, translating messages from Russian to English and writing like documents upon documents about these problems, like explaining as clearly as possible, going to, and we had like all sorts of different meetings too with, Roxanne, with the Russian-speaking guys, with other people, with other admins and this and that. And in the end, I was like, this is fucked up. Like, how the fuck do these people expect to change the world when they can't even communicate amongst themselves, when they can't even fix problems amongst themselves, you know? And I kind of, I don't know, I was, you know, I didn't know really what to do. I was kind of fucked. At the same time, while I was doing all of this, I was also like taking a train through Siberia, through Russia. And then I decided to stay in, around Lake Baikal in Siberia, in the city there. And then I was just like all alone there, and I'm like, oh fuck, like this is fucked. But, yeah.
That's what is important for people. The message, the main thing that I'm trying to get across here, I'm as real as they come. I mean, the show's called All Real. That's how I feel. I don't have an allegiance to anybody or anything. If something is right, it's right. If it's wrong, it's wrong, you know? And I kind of like you've expressed in your writings I've read, I'm all for the Venus Project. I'm not saying anything against them, but I think it's vital for people to understand these things because of what you just said, how people don't question things in general, but something like this, for example, where they're, you know, it's all good in a lot of ways, and it seems all good, and the ideas seem, you know, they're on point and all these types of things, and they seem to have so many things going for them and working a lot of times. And I've seen it where people's like, that's it. That's good enough. I'm 100% Venus Project, you know, and that's it. And anything that comes from them is great. And I've, you know, you have to, like you said, I read your writing and I saw Jock say it, and I've said it forever. You question everything,
exactly, including
no matter who
Jock,
tells you,
including everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, and it's like I was saying earlier about experience, you know, most people, obviously, me included, hasn't worked with the Venus Project. So you don't know, you know, and that's why I wanted to get this out and let people understand what's going on behind the scenes before you commit your life and you're, you know, start sending them money. And we'll get into the money here in just a second. And like you said, it has a rigid hierarchical structure centered on Roxanne. And, you know, I'm a very intuitive person, you know, and I don't jump to conclusions. I try not to, and I definitely am not judgmental. But, you know, you watch somebody enough, you get a feel for their demeanor, their character, and things like that. It kind of strikes me that way with her. I have to admit, before I read your stuff. And so, and I get it. I mean, on one hand, I get it because I understand when you have taken time and you've invested so much into something, you know, you feel like, no, I know the best way here, you know, whatever. But something of this magnitude, when you're talking about trying to change the world, essentially, in society, you have to take any and everything into account, and you have to take all help into account. And, you know, you can't be, you know, the Hitler or the Stalin of the Venus Project and say everything goes through me and I approve or don't approve. It's not going to work. And what is going to end up happening is apparently what's happening. The lack of communication, because everything has to go through her and essentially be approved by her. And then again, like you said, the non-questioning of the higher up, so to speak, in the Venus Project. Just to point out real quick, on your blog, for anybody that wants to know, first of all, the name of the article that you wrote is Why I Left the Venus Project. That's, I mean, if you go on the blog, her blog, Big Sasha's Small World.
Big World, Small Sasha.
Excuse me. Right? Hey, hold on. It hit me after I said it. Something's big and something's small. But
Big Sasha, Small World. Maybe one day if I ever get fat, you know, I'll change it.
Yeah, there you go. I'm sure it'll still be available. Yes. Big World, Small Sasha, that one. Yeah. But the article, the blog post, whatever, is called Why I Left the Venus Project. A lot of people listening to this show are at minimal aware of the Venus Project. Most of them support it. I'm telling you, you have to read it, because if not, you're closing your mind off and you're not going to understand the point that I'm making, that we're both making here. It's just about understanding, behind the scenes. And the only way you can get that is through experience like yours. And there's other people, you've included links on there with their resignations, and they have this similar experience. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You listed six or seven on there.
There's many more.
Right. And another thing, again, I'm not bashing the Venus Project. This is all about facts and truth and making people aware and understanding. Another thing that you point out that I looked up, you include links also right there. You can just click and see. You don't have to do any extra research yourself. Is how they tried to make the film, the major motion picture, and they had $200,000 donated.
Yeah.
And they say it. They say it right there. I mean, the link you provide, it's them saying this. And I read most of their response, and honestly, it was just a lot of excuses. It was one thing and this and that. And I'm sure it's difficult, but like you said, this is things people have to think about. If you had $200,000 to make a movie script that you haven't even made, and this is years now, and then now you're going to turn around and say, but okay, we couldn't do that shit, but I tell you what, they keep sending us money, and when we end up with about 15 million, we're going to start building a whole entire fucking city.
Yeah.
That's the stuff people need to think about and question.
Yeah, well, now the plan is to build a research center, and
it's a research center first.
I went through in the blog, and I'm trying to be as, fair and realistic as possible, because I do think that they are well-intentioned. I don't think that Roxanne is some evil whatever, or anybody, volunteering for the Venus Project. I do think they are well-intentioned, but they are extremely poorly organized, in my opinion.
Right.
And they have a ton of problems within the organization, which I outlined, in that blog. And for me, I mean, the biggest kind of point I wanted to make, well, one of the biggest points, is I just don't see, I mean, first of all, how realistic it is for them to... how realistic their plan is, because, I mean, basically their plan is, to eventually make an experimental city. First they're going to they want to make a high-tech research center, right? Or a center for resource management. Right. And eventually to make a city, and then to make more and more cities. And I was just kind of, I wanted to point out the fact that, I mean, first of all, I don't think it's ever going to happen. One, because of my personal experience on, seeing how complicated it was to do anything in the Venus Project, and how, right. Like you said, if they weren't able to make a script with $200,000, then how do they expect to build, an entire center? And they want it to be kind of automated and high tech and all this stuff. And the second point was that I think even if they made, say, an experimental city, I don't think it would make much of a difference in this world, because I think those people living in that center would be so highly influenced by today's society that it will just be another high-tech city. I don't think that it will change the world. And I mean, there have been many other communities that wanted to lead by example and change the world, through their ideas, and it never worked out. So yeah.
And that's another point, Sasha, that I definitely want to cover here just a little bit. Is that because what I've seen in my experience doing this and being involved with stuff like this, obviously, even the Venus Project, like you said, essentially, other than informing, lectures and things like that, ultimately that's their idea and their goal, that they think that would, change the world in essence. But I see it all the time. As a matter of fact, just a couple days ago, where this was a discussion sort of group thing, and people are replying saying that, we just got to build eco villages, or, any of these names that's used, and, and people will love it and they'll want to join. And so that's why I think it's important to cover this for a second, that, again, you can analyze things till they're, dead or whatever, go on forever. But to sum it up, in some ways, yeah, you could it might have an impact on these types of things. But ultimately, I agree with you. I mean, I agree with what you said. I've already thought those things and felt those things. And again, anybody, that's why I'm encouraging them to read your blog, but that post in general, it's very informative. It goes into a lot of things, and you explain what you're saying now about why you feel these ways. And it's hard to argue because, you mentioned the kibbutz, or however you say that, kibbutz in Israel, that started off as self-sustainable community. They provided the needs for the members. This is exactly what people are saying to do.
They were even shaped like in this circular fashion. You can see the picture that I have on that blog. It's shaped like a TV.
That was actually the city.
Not all.
Is that what that was?
Yeah. I think.
Oh shit! I didn't know that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if all of them were like that, but yeah. I mean, the point is there have been many great ideas, there are, and that's
right.
What a resource-based economy is. It's a great idea, and there have been many other great ideas, and they all failed because they didn't take into account, I think, human behavior. They didn't think through enough. They didn't take into account the influence of this society, the entire global structure. And you can think about communism. People say, oh, communism failed. I mean, the idea of communism was never even tried. We never even got to that point where you can have an example of, Marx's idea of communism.
You grew up, or you were born in Russia. That wasn't communist?
I mean, you have to think about...
By definition?
What in terms of the idea, I mean, what happened in Russia, I mean, that was... Basically, everybody was forced to have a job. Everybody was forced to work. Everybody received kind of an equal share, but there were tons of problems, and it wasn't. It wasn't exactly the way that it wasn't exactly the idea of communism that actually was played out in real life.
I see. Yeah. Well, all isms, of course, no matter what it is, they all. Joining forces is they all deal with money, and they all deal with some form of hierarchy in essence. So they're all going to basically be doomed to fail. I like Steve Saylor. He's a guy that makes videos pertaining to what we're talking about and stuff like that. And I had him on the show recently, and he coined the term. I haven't heard it before he said it, but I like it, and I'm going to use it. But everybody wants to use an ism. Everybody, again, has to think inside the box and say, well, socialism, communism, capitalism. Well, how about automationism? Right? I liked it. And I'm like, yeah, I can get down with that. That's cool,
Or just stop using isms, and...
Well, ultimately, that's how I feel, yeah. I don't... That's why, honestly, I can't tell you in detail. I could look up the dictionary term, but I can't tell you in detail about a lot of these structures, because again, once you understand it's all bullshit, why am I going to sit here and study it? So, but yeah, I think that's very important, because everybody's going to believe what they want to believe ultimately. But if you have an open mind and you're a critical thinker and you care, and I agree. I mean, Roxanne and everybody involved with the Venus Project, 9.5 out of 10 times is probably because they care. They do want to do something good and help society and everything. But yeah, it's important to question everything and really think of things in realistic terms, and all these people suggesting to build these things. Like I said, I just read this discussion recently where that's what they're saying. This is what we have to do. I mean, first of all, you're still, like you said, you're going to be influenced by the rest of society. You're not going to be on a different planet. You're still here. So you're still going to, and one of the bigger things is that you're still going to need money, right? You're still going to need to trade for other things. How are you going to get resources and things for the village or for the town?
Exactly. And that was the main point. Another main point I wanted to make in this blog is that, even if you make this experimental city extremely self-sustainable and efficient, which, like I said, you'll need lots and lots of money to do that in the first place. But even if you do that, you will still need to trade for some things, some raw material, what about computers? What about software? What about, even just people using platforms like Facebook and YouTube and whatever the fuck else they're influenced by from the outside world, and Google collecting their data. Are you going to want self-driving cars in this city? If it's going to be super high tech, maybe you want self-driving cars. Okay. Who can you get that from? Who has that technology? Google? It's going to be basically, I would say, probably impossible to have a super automated high-tech city in this society without having to trade with the outside world for some stuff, or being influenced by it through the internet. Because what are you going to do? Just cut everybody off of, Facebook?
Yeah, this is why it's important to question everything from all angles. The bigger the idea, the more questions will be involved. If intelligence, common sense, and the scientific method are utilized, any question can be answered in due time. But more important than the answer is to ask the right questions in the first place. Otherwise, all your efforts and energy will be wasted. As always, I want to thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I really hope you got something out of it. That's what this is all about for me, trying to inform, educate, and inspire people. The sooner people realize the veil of lies we've bought into and that we already possess all the knowledge and technology we need for sustainability and abundance for everyone, the sooner the transition can start. Please feel free to email, follow, share, comment, like, subscribe. I welcome any and all feedback or support. And I hope you'll tune in next time for another episode of the All Real Show. We are one.